Everyone for registering and attending our the professional development series here. So today we're going to be talking about mentoring and funding undergraduate research. In addition to myself, we also have Julie Morris here from the Office of Undergraduate Research from the main campus. And hopefully, if I'm not too long-winded, we'll have time for Julie to talk about the Magellan programs that her office offers for supporting undergraduate research that our students are also eligible for. And hopefully we'll also have time for some discussion and some questions, especially if you have students that are interested in pursuing Magellan scholarships, whether it's this cycle or next cycle. Julie is definitely the person to talk to and to answer all the questions. We'll have, like I said, this will be hopefully have about 45 minutes or so of presentation. Hopefully we'll have enough time for some question and answer at the end if we have. Please feel free to chime in with any questions you might have along the way. Either raise your hand if Elaine or Julie, if they notice, and they can kind of let me know. There's a hand raise, or if you have any questions, you can also feel free to just turn on your mic and ask. We don't have a big group here, so feel free to just interrupt me as we go along. So thank you for attending, and we'll kind of get started here. I guess kind of before I get started, I do want to kind of advertise our next professional development series. This is going to be presented by Elaine. It'll be October 21st, so it's a few weeks out yet, but this will kind of finish kind of her series that she has for the professional development series. Her first presentation was all about kind of finding the awards, and then the second one was about the writing the proposals. And now, hopefully, once you've got the proposal now and you spent all the money, then how do you kind of manage it along the way? And then how do you finally close it out? So to kind of complete that loop. So that's going to be October 21st. So it's a few weeks away yet. I kind of wanted to start talking about just kind of mentoring undergraduate research or undergraduate research students, and just kind of talk about it in general. And so one of the things I think it's worth really kind of mentioning, really stressing, is that when we're working with undergraduates in the lab, yes, there's a lot about this that we have to kind of focus on the training of whatever techniques that they're doing, but we also have to keep in mind that this is kind of a mentoring activity. This is an educational activity it's not just showing them how to do things in the lab or do a certain technique or whatnot, but there's going to be a lot more into it. There's going to be a lot more advising and talking about kind of career plans and career readiness and motivation and all kinds of other support. So it's a lot more comprehensive than just training them in that activity that they're taking on. Right? So there's a lot of different sort of models for this and a lot of different ways to go about this. And you can kind of do some Google searches and find all kinds of things. And there's lots of peer-reviewed literature out there as well about undergraduate, mentoring. One of the things that I stumbled upon when I was kind of preparing for this, because I was trying to look for kind of a nice sort of summary that kind of wraps it up together. And this was from the University of Notre Dame and their Kneb Center that is really kind of, it's a 2-page sort of PDF, and I have it linked here in the slides, and I sent the slides out to the participants, and it just kind of covers a lot of the highlights here. It has a few things that kind of what the mentor should expect, what the students should expect, kind of defining a little bit of those roles, and also kind of gives you what I really like here is some of these bullet points that really shows kind of what kinds of things should be addressed up front, what kind of conversation should be had. And then just some general advice as well, kind of on the second page, especially for new mentors and for, sort of just in general, sort of, tips that they have. But so there's the link of the PDF there. I'm not going to go through all of this stuff in detail, but I think it's a handy sort of guide, if you want to go back to this, just to kind of, as something to kind of start thinking about when you are working with students. The other thing I kind of want to say about, at least in my own experience working with research students, is there's really no correct way to mentor them. There's a lot of wrong things that you can do for sure, but I don't think there's any like one set correct way to mentor. And part of that is really trying to take this mentoring activity and trying to tailor it to the student. And one of the things that I really try to focus on the training and coaching side of mentoring is really kind of training the student kind of work toward independence, so they can work independently in the lab and be able to do that activity on their own without me being able to micromanage that. And I think this is really important. That kind of touches on a lot of the other aspects of mentoring. This really helps them build confidence in their ability. I find that a lot of students, when they start off in the lab in these activities, they have very, very low confidence in what they know and how they're able to apply it. I find that in most cases that they're coming in with such a low, that they have the lower sort of impression of their confidence than they should. They actually are more able, but they just need to be able to kind of have some of that reinforcement and kind of get some of those successes to kind of show that they can do these types of things. And like I said, I think that kind of hits on a lot of other aspects of mentoring. The other thing I've kind of seen in kind of my own experiences with students is that they really respond well kind of to structure. And I've used a couple of tools in the past to kind of help with this. One is kind of a research contract, and using that as a tool to kind of facilitate a discussion from both parties, both the student and the mentor, about what are the expectations in that relationship. What is the student going to be responsible for doing? What are the expectations? And the same thing for the mentor. Right? And then also, what we've done just kind of recently, we've kind of really started in this last year or so, is really looking at using kind of the more of a structured mentorship program. Then I'm going to highlight two of them here that we have at Upstate that any faculty can really participate in. So I want to kind of show the research contract first. This is actually from the Office of Undergraduate Research in Columbia. They have this template. I kind of simplified it a little bit. It's actually a 3-page document, but I kind of took some of the spacing out to kind of show it on this one slide. There's also, if you're looking at the slides, if you have those, there's a link to this, but you can find it through the Office of Undergraduate Research webpage from the main campus. But this research contract touches on a lot of the things that we had mentioned, kind of pointed out earlier, and also kind of came up on that handout from the University of Notre Dame. Of course, you just have the typical things like contact information, but talking about expectations, laying out what exactly the work schedule is, start and end dates, what the expected work times are. One thing that I think is really important is having a very clear sort of communication plan. Make sure that the student knows that they can contact you and how you want to be contacted, and vice versa too, so that that how best to contact the student. So I know that some students are very responsive through email, and some are not. Sometimes you have to spend more time with texting and other things to really be able to reach them. The other thing I think is really nice about the way that they have this structured is that they also have these other requirements. If there's anything with, regularly scheduled meetings, research groups, if they have to have a research presentation or anything else. I mean, it's a nice sort of template to start from to kind of build this sort of contract with your student. So the student kind of, again, knows what the expectations are. And this is also something that, what I like to do with this, I like to create this with the student and create it together, like literally, kind of work together on the computer and make this so that they're invested in it, and so they know what the expectations are. And it's a tool to kind of really kind of hold them accountable. It's also something that kind of holds us as mentors accountable as well. So I wanted to kind of switch gears a little bit and kind of talk about the kind of the so-called sort of structured mentoring programs we have at Upstate. So we actually have two programs here. One is Upstate Grow, and this program really kind of started as part of our strategic plan that kind of focuses on kind of increased focus on experiential learning, and then also is emphasized by our QEP right now that again is all based really focused on career readiness. So the original kind of intention of Upstate Grow was to really kind of design really specifically with student employment in mind. Internships are just student workers that kind of work on campus. And so that's where kind of that acronym comes in from here, this GROW, this guided reflection on work. There is plans to kind of expand GROW to involve really just any experiential learning activity that students take on with some sort of supervision or some sort of mentoring along with it. And I'll talk a little bit about this in a little bit more detail. But the other program that we have, again, we started this, we had our first kind of summer, or cohort of summer research students last summer that participated in this Evaluate UR, kind of the structured mentoring program. This is originally developed by Carleton College with support from the National Science Foundation. And this was developed with really kind of undergraduate research in mind. Although it's still developed in a way that it could be expanded into other types of experiential learning as well. We're not using at least not right now, we're not using the Evaluate UR system and website that they have. We actually have Selena and her office actually built kind of a version of Evaluate UR using chalk and wire for our own purposes for our campus. But it's all the same material that was developed specifically by Carleton College through the NSF. And like I said, I'll talk about this in a little more detail. But first, I wanted to go talk about GROW, because again, this is something I think is going to be something that we're going to start hearing more about on campus, and it's going to be something that there's going to be a lot of initiatives and kind of encouragement for any faculty that are working with students in any types of experiential learning to start to use some form of either GROW or Evaluate UR to create these structured mentorship programs to really start hitting on those elements of the QEP and this career readiness. Right? So and I kind of list here some of the slides here that they provided me about GROW, but essentially it's kind of like I said, is that we're trying to take these experiential learning activities and kind of try to ensure that they really are the kind of that high impact activity that we're having with these students, and to provide some sort of structure and some consistency throughout the different types of experiences that students might have. So part of what makes it kind of be a high impact, and this is what kind of the kind of questions and the activities are all really about, is to kind of help the students make those connections and be kind of be able to reflect on what kind of work that they're doing, what kind of experiences they're doing, and what they might be learning from it. So if they can make those connections between the classroom and the lab, they can look at these high impact activities and make those real life connections, and think about how that might relate to their career readiness and how that relates to their education. These are the types of things that they're trying to encourage. So, and overall, and I kind of like this from the materials that they sent me, is that they want to reframe the whole student experience from kind of transactional to transformative. I like that, because instead of just you're just there trying to train them to do a job or a certain technique or a research project, but really the focus is on helping them transform, and not just the specific activity itself. And also for the mentor, really kind of thinking about our role is not just supervising them, not just telling them what to do and what not to do, but also to kind of think about our role as really kind of encompassing all those mentoring activities, helping them through not only the experience that they are taking on, whatever project they might be taking on, but also helping them with those next steps as well, through to graduation, through to, their career readiness type of aspects, finding that first job, that first placement in professional schools, grad schools, whatever. And really to kind of think about this as not something that is that costs, whether it's in time or money or other resources. And this is really, I think, from both the student and the mentor's perspective, but think of this as an investment. And that this is something that is kind of really worthwhile for both parties for this. So the way that the GROW program works is that the student and the mentor are going to kind of two different sort of activities throughout the program. So the student itself, the student is going to create a self-evaluation. They're going to do self-evaluation before the activity and then after the activity, right? So they have those two roles. Then the mentor or the supervisor is going to do what they call kind of checkups, where they think about these guided reflections. And there are going to be two of these during the kind of the midpoints. And then we have here kind of the week 6 to 7 and 13 and 14, but basically thinking about if it's a semester long sort of activity, then these would be kind of two midpoints throughout the throughout that semester. And then at the end, the mentor, the supervisor is going to complete kind of evaluation of the student, right? And I really think that part there is, I think it could be very helpful, especially when you're compiling letters of recommendation that might be, in a year or so after that experience, to have that evaluation already made when it's fresh. So that way that could be kind of the basis of the letter of recommendation later. So I kind of like that aspect of this. So these checkups themselves are going to be these structured conversations from that the mentor is going to facilitate, and it's going to occur again in those two kind of midpoints in the activity. They're going to be guided by some survey questions that are sent out to the students, and these are all kind of structured in a way that they could be one-on-one discussions, or you could do it as a group. If you have maybe a small research group, 2 or 3 students, maybe you could do the set of guided reflection sort of conversations with the whole group. And with the idea here that these sort of checkups are only going to take, maybe 5 to 10 minutes to be able to just kind of, just to have or start kind of a conversation with the student. Right? Now, to kind of switch kind of gears a little bit, the Evaluate UR program that I had mentioned before. So the Upstate GROW, that's something that's been designed kind of for student workers in mind, and then we're trying to expand it to kind of all kind of experiential learning. Evaluate UR is something that is probably a little bit more of a little bit more robust sort of system, and I'll kind of show kind of what's all involved with this. But it's definitely designed with undergraduate research experiences kind of in mind, right? In this case, it's a very sort of similar system where you're looking at kind of these checkpoints with your students, but there's 3 assessments that take place, and both the student and the mentor are going to partake in these assessments. There's a kind of pre-experience assessment that occurs, a midpoint, and then a post. And so there's a little bit of difference of what the student and the mentor does. The students will actually answer some reflection questions as well. That happens in the pre and the post. But both the student and the mentor are going to go through this assessment tool that's built out for this. So the assessments themselves are a series of questions, and they're covered in they're grouped in kind of 11 different categories. So here's the categories. It's not, if you take out the optional questions and the confidence, but that's your 11 categories. And in each one of these categories, there's 2 to 5 questions each one of those questions. So Um, all that together, this assessment tool is 35 questions. Right? So it seems like a lot, but it doesn't take too long to go through it. You're basically answering this on kind of a Likert scale, kind of the, 5 is kind of always does this and 1 is never. And go through this to be able to answer lots of different questions. Okay? Just to give you an example of one of the sets of questions, if we look at one of the categories, which is the ability to deal with obstacles. Okay? So in this, then again, remember, this is a question that both the student and the faculty are answering separately on 2 separate assessments. And so is not discouraged by the setbacks or unforeseen events and perseveres. And then so we do this. And then another question that's kind of in the same category, shows flexibility and willingness to take risks and try again. And 3, troubleshoots problems and searches for ways to do things more effectively. Okay? That's actually, I chose that kind of category because those were those 3 questions were some of the more interesting questions I thought for my students this summer, that it actually started a lot of conversations with the students, because once the assessments are done by both the student and faculty, the idea is that the mentor and the student get together to discuss the results. And now the idea here isn't to discuss all 35 questions. That's not the idea, to kind of spend that much time on this, but really to kind of talk about maybe certain questions that may be one of the students, the student might have a really high confidence in a question. They say, oh, well, I'm always doing that. But the mentor maybe doesn't think that they're doing that as often as they think. So maybe there's a misalignment there, and that can start a conversation. And I also found that in both ways that this happens, where the student feels like they're doing really well on something, and then maybe I'm not thinking they're doing as well. But I also saw the other way, where I think that they're doing amazingly well in one area, but then when they're answering the survey, they're actually thinking they're never doing it, or they're seldom doing it. And those really were great conversations to have, to kind of help them with that confidence, because they think that they're not doing something that they are. And that's really kind of the idea here, is to really just facilitate all these conversations with the students, and kind of pick out these areas to think about ways that they can improve, or ways that they can be more mindful with their experiences and get more out of it. So the reflection questions here, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are the questions that the students are going to answer before their research experience and then afterwards. The language changes a little bit for the post reflection questions, but essentially it's the same 14 questions. I found this because, again, we did this for the first time this summer with our cohort of research students in NSE, and I found this to be a really interesting exercise, especially at the beginning, because you get I thought I had a pretty good handle on my students that were coming in and what their skill sets were, and kind of where we're going to, and how I was going to start working with them. But reviewing the reflection questions and their answers, I had to kind of modify a little bit, because I learned a lot about what their impressions coming in were, what their thoughts were, and kind of what kinds of things that they needed to be successful. And it was really useful, actually, for me as a mentor. And it was, again, it's just another way to facilitate those conversations, so that you know what the student needs, and so that you can be more supportive of those things. And just to kind of review here, again, they got those 3 assessments that they both partake in. There's that pre, the mid, and the post. And then, as I kind of mentioned several times along the way, a lot of these ideas here is to really just facilitate the mentor and student communications, to provide feedback in both directions too, to find out if, you as a mentor, are you doing a good job? Are you able to help them with all the things that they need support in? And also feedback to the student. improvement plans, building confidence, really gaining those independence. There's lots of different things that can really improve in. And the other part is that I think this is really helpful for, and I mentioned before, is really writing letters of recommendation. This provides so much material and so much just data that you can use for letters of recommendation that, yes, it does take time to do any of these structured mentoring programs along the way, but I think you gain that time back because that letter of recommendation that you're ultimately going to probably need to provide for the student is going to be easier to write because you have such a much of a deeper understanding of, you know, what kind of student maybe they kind of started off at you know, where they were when they started, and then, you know, what this experience and how this experience really kind of helped transform them. And that's just really great material for letter of recommendation. So again, mentoring just, you know, it encompasses all of these things, and it's something that we really need to kind of be aware of, that it's not just kind of that training activity. So to kind of switch gears to talk about the money side of this, okay? So if we want to do some mentoring of undergrad research, it'd be nice to be able to get some money to do this, and especially to help support the students financially as well. So we have several kind of so-called internal or, you know, USC Upstate programs. One of them that we just had our first our spring, well, the deadline for the spring assistantships actually passed last night. But our student assistantships will provide $1,500 to be able to support a student worker for a semester or for even a summer session. The Scholarly Startup Award, which is for the faculty, but that also can be money from the Scholarly Startup Award, can also be used to fund student assistantships. So that can be budgeted in that way. We also have a pot of money for student travel, and this doesn't have a specific deadline. It's basically ongoing. You do need to apply, you know, hopefully, you know, several weeks before the travel, so that we can have all the travel authorizations and all the approvals and things to be able to pay for it. And really, so this can cover conference travel and travel that is kind of needed for the research. We can provide up to $800. I put a little star there because that pot of money, because of COVID, is maybe not as robust as it has in the past. But we do have some funds available for conference travel. And we also have kind of our own version of the mini grant that can provide up to $500 for supplies, those types of things, consumables that is needed for that research project. Right? And again, that also has an ongoing deadline as well. There's also we also have several mechanisms through USC Columbia and the Vice President's for Research Office. There's the Aspire program that can be budgeted for student salaries. The RISE program, which is really fantastic for us, because RISE is exclusively for the senior campus faculty to compete for, but you can use that money to not only pay yourself some summer salary, but you also could potentially budget student salary and student support as well on that. And then, of course, the Magellan programs that I'm going to have Julie speak about here in a second. One thing that I want to mention before kind of Julie take over, actually, I think two things I want to mention is, one is that if you do pursue a Magellan scholarship, we have a program that's funded through USC Upstate. It's our program that we basically try to provide support for the mentor that is that's working with Magellan Scholar student. Okay? So if you're applying for a Magellan scholarship, don't forget to look into the Magellan Mentors program that we have, and consider applying for that program as well. The mechanism is essentially to provide matching funds for the mentor. The Magellan scholarship is a $3,000 scholarship. The Magellan mentor essentially matches that $3,000 to support the mentor. And that can be used for salary, supplies, can be used for travelers. So there's some options there for how that money can be used. The other thing I wanted to mention is that our Magellan, the Magellan deadline is coming up in later in October. I believe it's October 20th, although I think Julie will probably clarify that if I'm wrong. And we do have a kind of proposal workday coming up on October 12th. So that's Tuesday, October 12th. Elaine and myself will be in the office, and we will be here to kind of review proposals. So you can send your students send the students to the SARS office up here in admin 308 with their Magellan proposal in hand, and we will work with them to kind of give them feedback and advice. As a faculty member, you're more than welcome to bring your mentor collaboration form, which is essentially the part of the Magellan Scholarship that you're responsible for, that you're authoring. And again, that's something that we'd be more than happy to provide feedback and advice on. Right? So I'm going to, at this point, I think I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to let Julie take over if she is ready to do so.
Thank you. You are correct. The October 20th is the deadline for the scholar. So thank
Awesome.
you for mentioning that.
Yes, I'm glad I got the date right.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it is my pleasure to continue our conversation today. And so what I'm going to do is share my screen now. Start here. All right. So very basic. What we're going to chat about today is the money that we have available through the Office of Undergraduate Research for you and your students. And then we'll talk about getting it. So what I really wanted to focus on are there are 4 programs that Upstate students are eligible for, depending on what their backgrounds and eligibility are. Whoops. So for Scholar, of course, all years, all disciplines, all campuses, it does have a minimum GPA requirement of 3.300, and that's up to $3,000 for the student to use for salary, materials, supplies, travel, both travel to conferences and travel for research, any combination there. We also have a mini grant, which is up to $1,000 materials, supplies, and research travel. Again, all years, all disciplines. There is no minimum GPA requirement for the mini grants. We also have a population of students who may be eligible for our Magellan Guarantee program. And these are students that have spent the summer in the TRIO McNair Scholars Program, which is hosted hosted is probably the right word, hosted through Columbia, but is open to institutions across South Carolina. And for that program, it is $1,500 for student salary, and then the mentors also can receive $500. And then we also have a conference travel, which we work closely with Upstate to fund students. Our Voyager is up to $500 for conference travel. The students do not have to have a previous Magellan Award, so that's completely independent, although they can. And we try to fund, so generally we try to fund first through alternative funding that individuals may have, and then have the students funded through Voyager. So I'm going to show real quick as well. Let's see. Switch over to our website so you can see that real quick. There we go. So what I wanted to show on our webpage is there's a few places where you can get some information and further details. Very much on our Apply for Funding page, OUR and Magellan funding. And you can see the list of different awards that we have. And so students on all campuses are eligible for conference travel, for the Magellan Scholar, for the mini grant. Let's see. And then depending on if they're trio scholars, then also this option right here. But each of these pages have additional information. It has the application process, step by step. What I strongly encourage first is to get your students to review the application video series. There are, it's available as students need it, so they can watch it anytime that they're ready. And I do encourage faculty as well to review it. It has some tips and hints, specifics on the application process, and then as well, award requirements, using your money, and then we have a special for mentors. And so that has a similar format for our other pages as well. But going back here, all right. So then what I wanted to just talk about a little bit more is specific tips and basically get your help. So the biggest roadblock for our students, and I know that you experience this as well with them, is that a lot of our students feel like they can't do it. And so we find that just having their mentor say, you can do this, you should really look into this, gives them that extra confidence to take the step to dive in a little bit more. That's the most important feedback we've gotten from students is, why did you apply? Well, my mentor said I could do it. So anything that you can do to help us, and please do feel free also to send your students my way. Happy to talk with them and help with that confidence building as well, and say, yes, you really can do this, and let us help you together. In terms of additional tips and hints, as I mentioned, the application videos, both the Scholar and Mini Grant, contain some tips and hints specific to those applications. The key criteria for all of our programs is the student's ability to explain their work. And so that clear, thorough project description, plan, and methods from the student, helping the student understand what they're going to be doing, that context, it is incredibly meaningful in the application process. And then the second piece, as mentioned, was that detailed mentoring plan. So we very much know that all of our mentors are fantastic and will help our students in every way possible. But the reviewers like to see a little bit more detail. What does that mean for you? What does that mean in terms of what your student needs? Are there particular skills that your student needs to learn to be successful on the project? Are there techniques in terms of evaluation and analyzing data? What does your student know? What don't they know? What are there particular software packages the student's going to be exposed to? So very specific to the student can be helpful to the reviewers in evaluating that mentoring plan of support for that student growth, for that specific student growth. And then the other thing that I hear from students, and in terms of the ones that are most successful, is that they understood the timeline for their submission. So we have students who think, oh yeah, I can just send it to my mentor on the day it's due and no problem. And so helping them understand that it does take a little bit longer than that, and that they will need to go through some drafts. And those are the students we see that feel most comfortable with the process, is that they were given deadlines to help help them help you through that process. So kind of just simple takeaways from all of that is that we really do have money, and we very much want your students to get our money. So however I can help in that process, please do let me know, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand or just turn on your mic. Yep, Scott.
Hi, Julie. Thanks for coming and talking to us. I have a question about the Voyager, because it looks like the meetings that I go to are going to be back in person this year, and I have a Magellan scholar who I would love to be able to bring to the meeting with me so she can present her work. The meetings aren't until spring. Is time frame an issue with those? I know they're kind of rolling, but as far as the amount of money that's available.
So we try to, yes, that's a great question. So it is first come, first serve. We try to have
know for probably January, February if abstract accepted.
Right. And so what we encourage students to do is to apply when they're applying for the program or for the conference.
Okay.
So then what we can do is award contingent upon acceptance.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if that's the same process with Upstate travel. So we would want your student to apply for both to make sure that we can cover as much as possible for that student.
Okay. Thank you. Josh, do you have anything to add as far as the Upstate travel money for students?
Yeah, just same sort of thing here, since we have kind of an ongoing sort of rolling basis. Apply early, I would say, when you're maybe as soon as you have a proof of submission of your abstract, might be a good point to start applying for the funding. And apply to both programs. And because usually the way the workflow is that we kind of let Julie's office know kind of how much we can fund here, and then they try to kind of cover what they can on their side of things. So yeah, definitely take advantage of both. In my experience, when it is first come, first serve with the Columbia's programs, when the money runs out, and sometimes it runs out really quickly, it's apply as soon as you possibly can, because there has been times when there was one year when I applied, I think somewhere in like mid-January for an April meeting, and the money was already run out. And I was like, oh, okay, so now we're gonna have to apply in more like, December instead.
Okay.
So,
yeah, abstracts are due in November, so hopefully we can sneak it in there.
Yeah. So, Julie, is there still, if I remember right, in the past, there was for spring travel, you had to wait until there was some sort of deadline in December when it opened up. Is that correct still?
That is a great question. So I am going to look and see what this year COVID has been fun on our deadline. So let's see what the current plans.
Because I remember in the past waiting and applying on that day. It's like, okay, it opens up on December 15th. I hit submit on December 15th. So.
Right. No. So what we're doing this year is it is going to be very much a rolling deadline. Okay. So applications are open for the entire year at the moment. And you must apply at least 30 days prior to travel. But again, we encourage as early as possible. It may be that next year we move to a 3 round process, but this year it's open for the entire year right now.
Chris, do you have a question?
Yeah, actually I have several. So one is about the Magellan Scholar. I have never written one, but I have been on the reviewing committee for them. And I understand the students are supposed to write the narrative. And I felt that as I was reviewing them, maybe they got a lot of help. Like some you could say, oh, yep, I bet the student did write that. And in others cases, I was thinking, I just don't know if the student wrote this or the professor wrote this. Where is the dividing line there? Obviously, the student can't just say, hey, I want to do this, And then, the professor's like, well, we're not going to do that. What, I don't know, like, how much help is too much help? And where's the dividing line of work there, I guess?
No, I hear you, and I appreciate that question. I know that is something that, we always struggle with. The guidelines state that the student is supposed to write it and provide their understanding of the project. And certainly in the methods, it is important that, and I think this is where the multiple drafts come in, is that, have the student try and explain what they're doing, and then talk about, well, not quite. How about thinking about it in this frame? And how do you explain how you're doing that? And have you thought through each of the steps? So let's take that back and talk through it together. Certainly, it is supposed to be the student's work. I don't know if that answers the question, or if anybody else has comments who has gone through that process, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with several over the years, and it is the way that I always approach it. I think Julie mentioned the timelines and the drafts and these types of things. I usually start working with the student probably a good 6 to 8 weeks before we're going to submit it, to give enough time for all those drafts. And what I try to do with them is that we have basically just a whole bunch of series of meetings where I have them kind of do a little bit of like scaffold writing, where we'll meet to kind of talk about the overview of the project and whatnot. And then I let them go and like write up like an outline, what their interpretation of that conversation is. And then that then facilitates the next conversation, which is all about clarifying, no, we're actually going to do this, not that. And here's the types of things. And then, and then part of that is, of course, just interweaving the literature and helping them find the literature and maybe giving them some of the literature to start looking at. But it's the way that I've done it in the past, it's a very long process, because I do keep, the student as the central, author there, and make sure it is what they're doing. But, as you're working with them, you're also helping them with their proposal writing, with their science communication. So hopefully they're going to evolve in their ability to communicate. And so hopefully it gets closer and closer to what a practitioner would be, saying. But yeah, it's one of those things where it does take a lot of time, and you're like, man, if I could just sit down and write this, I could do this in like 30 minutes, But it's definitely one of those things that does take a lot of time. And but yeah, if you're, I'd be more than happy to talk more in detail with you, Chris, and even kind of show some of because I always save all the drafts that I work with students. And and I kind of show you, it's like literally like week to week. It's you can see the evolution of how they're writing and the feedback that I'm giving them and whatnot. And it's really it's great that it feels like it takes a lot of time, and it definitely does, but it pays off, because the student, when they're actually partaking in the activity, they now know so much more. They're so much more invested. They know exactly what they're going to be doing, and they're ready to do it. And so all that time that you spent now is really pays off when you actually do the activity, because now they're there, they're ready to go, and you can get right into it. But yeah, I'll be more than happy to kind of talk more about that, kind of and give you more details. So.
Yeah. But I mean, the germ of the idea, that must come from the professor, right? I mean, I'm guessing it's not like someone's going to walk in and just say, I want to do this. And you're like, okay, write a Magellan for it.
Yeah.
I did have two other Upstate Scholar Program things. One is on the student travel, for the Upstate student travel. Is that just for students who are presenting at a conference, or could it could also be attending?
The preference is that they are presenting. I think that that would be kind of maybe more of a case by case sort of thing, and to see what the funding is available. We definitely want to prioritize those students that are presenting.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but there is money for, if a student is just attending, there is money there for them. but with the budgets being the way they are, that might be a deeper conversation.
Okay. So there's a competitive angle to this. I mean, not just till the money runs out, but there's an application that you could be denied, for instance, if you're like, yeah, that's not good enough. You
well, since I haven't denied anything since I've been in the job for 6 weeks, no, I mean, we want to make sure that activity is aligned in some way to their degree, what they're going to do. You know, I'd be more than happy to support a student that, you know, is interested in you know, starting a career in a field, and they want to go to that conference, and maybe just as an attendee. That would be something I think that would be more than happy to, to try to support. So,
okay.
But
and
not
then,
just a random conference that they found that, oh, it's in Tahiti. Let's go.
Right.
You know, so, you know, because I might go with them as an intern, you know.
Right.
So.
Well, and a similar question about the mini grant, the Upstate mini grant. So that can be used for supplies. Yep. Do we just turn in receipts for that, or is there a report you have to write at the end saying this is how we use the supplies, or what's the?
I think that, and Elaine might be able to jump in on this, but I believe that the purchasers for that does go through our office, and whoever the person that will be taking on Nicole's role would essentially be working on doing the kind of the purchasing and those types of aspects for that $500 award.
Yeah, that's right. We would purchase it through our office, and then we know where the money is and how to track it that way. So yeah, absolutely.
So not like a TAPS grant that there's a report due at the end. It's you would actually buy the thing and then it'd be done.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
We do have a final report mechanism that is absolutely broken, that isn't going to be fixed in the next few months. So we don't worry about that right now until we have the system fixed. So yeah. Now, I mean, Chris, there's something that we can talk about kind of later as well. There is some money available through NSC as well for the division to support some supply money for working with students on research as well. So that's something that is also available just for our unit, not for the whole campus. So.
Right. I have other questions about the mentoring part, but I'm happy to allow other people to ask about the money part first, if anyone wants to go.
I would say feel free and ask your questions.
Okay. So how often do you, as part of the contract or whatever, with the student, say you need to prepare your work for a presentation that will be given at some conference later? How often is that part of your contract?
For me, basically every one of them.
So all of them should plan on creating a presentation for a conference, or
that's the goal that we're working toward. Now, I'm not going to say that's successful. At least for me, that's not necessarily successful every time. And I'm just saying from my own sort of philosophy with this. I'm sure there's other ways of going about it. But that's what I've always kind of done with my students, to have some sort of deliverable at the end.
Yeah. Because my follow-up question is, what happens if the project doesn't work? Like, it's one thing to, if you're taking interviews or something, but in science, it doesn't work sometimes. Like, I'm going to do this. No, you're not. Nature says you're not going to do that. So, and you can do all semester long and you're not going to break that bond or whatever. So, what happens if the project is an utter fail? And then there's a follow-up to that is, well, how do you deal with students who have personal setbacks? Like we have great students, but many of them are complicated. They have lives that are complex, and they sometimes burn out or do have a spiral downward. And how do you deal with all of that? Is that going to take another hour, or is that?
No. I like it's. For me, but yes, there is a much longer and deeper conversation we could have for months, really, on that part. But I think it's all about just making sure the communication is open and letting the student know, and also internalizing this for yourself, that kind of, if you do the research contract model, that it's kind of an aspirational sort of goal. These are the things that we would like to do, and we'd like to keep up to this sort of level, but also be very flexible and be willing, have that communication with the student, say that if they're having some challenges or whatnot, that they should be coming to you and communicating with you and letting them know what you need. And so if that means stepping away from the lab and stepping away from the project and maybe taking it back up later when they're better, when they're in a better place for that, that's I think is really important to have those conversations. One of the first conversations I have with the students when we actually start in the lab, whether it's in the summer or during the semester, is, that I want them to be present in the lab physically, emotionally, and mentally, spiritually in the lab. And so if there are things going on that is kind of taking them away from the lab, even though they're physically there, to talk to me, to let me know about it, because I want them to be safe in the lab. And if they're not there fully present, that I need them to step away from the lab and go take care of whatever they need to take care of. And when they're in a better place, then come back. And I think I've always had success by having that conversation really early on and letting them know that there's that out and there's that understanding there. And I've had students take advantage of that and let me know. Like, they'll text me or they'll show up and it's like, look, stuff's going down. I can't do this today. I'm like, okay, just email me, text me, let me know when you're good to go, and I'll be more than happy to work with you later on it. And sometimes that is, they leave for a day. I've had them leave for a semester and then come back. It's just, like you said, it's very complex and it's very situational. So, Julie, you had something?
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit of an echo. So we have now been doing the Magellan Scholar for 16 years and 32 rounds. So you can imagine that we very much have experienced all of everything. Well, I shouldn't say that because now I've probably jinxed it. But I will say, so first addressing the question of if something doesn't work, and we know how valuable in research that didn't work is, because that allows us to see something else. And so for Discover U of SC, we welcome students to share their experiences with the projects that don't work. It doesn't have to be a success to be successful for them to present. So, the students find a lot of value in sharing what that journey was for them. What did they do? What didn't work? Do they have any ideas of why it didn't work? Do they have those next steps that they might address? So we always have students who are presenting work in progress. So we don't have to have results. We have students that might only have plans for their methods. And that's what they present on, because they haven't even really started the project, but it gives them that chance to understand and be able to communicate what their methods will be. And then absolutely, well, this is what we thought would happen. It didn't happen at all. Or poor student had a situation where, well, all of my flies died before we even had a chance to start the project. So I've been working to get new flies for the past 4 weeks. So all of those things can be very valuable for the student present, and we welcome that at Discover U of SC. In terms of students who have life happen, even for the Scholar and all of our grants, that happens sadly regularly, and I wish it didn't happen as much, but we do. Everybody has a life happening. And so I'm here to work with you and your student on what they need. If it's a situation where they may be able to stop working on it this semester, but could come back to it next semester, we'll just do an extension. Not a big deal. Easy to do. If it's something where the student just has to stop, I get that. We just need to help the student, support the student in the moment, and we'll stop. So please do contact me regularly. I know that Elena's had experience in conversing with me about situations, and so we'll make it happen however we can to be supportive of you and your students.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I didn't realize there was some flexibility. It just seemed like it's always, this is the deadline, you better get that report in, get this done. And it actually is intimidating to me. I mean, that's one. And we have a research symposium at Upstate. And I remember a few years ago, there was a presenter who was like, nothing worked. And he went through all the stuff and this didn't work and this didn't work. And I was like, you're brave, because everyone else here is saying, look at me, Mr. Researcher. I got everything to work. And I was like, yeah, that probably would be my poster if I was doing something. So yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't think I ever submitted a Magellan final report on time because things were always in progress. Things were always going to be continuing. Things were hasn't been presented yet or whatnot. Yeah, Julie's always been great about, I just let her know. I was like, hey, we're not going to be able to get this in. And it's like, no big deal. Just do it before the students graduate, basically. So no, and
yeah, the only deadline that's firm is the deadline for applications. That's something that we can't change. But the rest of it, however I can work with you and your students, I'm here to support their research experiences.
So the question in the chat is, I have a quick question. I teach senior seminar course every spring. Can I ask my students to apply for grants in May, or is that too early? So, Ellen, is there a certain program that you're wanting to ask about?
Hey, so I don't know about the program, but once there was like an opportunity that was symposium, and I wanted my students to apply for the program. And so it was, since I teach in spring, by the time that they're done, it's in May. And then some of them, they graduate, of course, some of them they don't, and they come back in fall. In fall, when I asked them, they weren't willing to apply, and they have forgotten probably the project. So I wanted to ask them to apply as early as May, which still they remember. And for every opportunity that I can find, whether it's grant or scholarship, anything, I can motivate them and they apply in May. And is that too early? Because if I ask them to apply in fall, I feel like they are not willing to do so, and probably they have forgotten everything.
Is this student generated application like the Magellan Scholars, or is it for?
It's a senior seminar course, so I give them questions to do research, and they do it on their own, and I just guide them throughout the semester. And I'm not sure whether it's a senior seminar course, so it's basically I give them a project to solve. I'm not sure whether it's considered as undergraduate research or not.
Yeah,
maybe that's
at least for our programs. I mean, Julie can talk about Columbia's, but for our programs, that's not really the scope of what we support. It's going to be something that is going to be more kind of outside of a typical course. So that doesn't mean, like, if you can have a student that's enrolled into like an independent studies or a so-called research credit, and that's something that's perfectly fine. We could support that student even if they're doing an independent study and a research assistantship and a mini grant. That's not a problem at all. But if this is an activity that's part of a course, that's not something that at least our programs here can really support on additionally.
I see. So that makes perfect sense. Thank you, Joshua.
Yeah. Julie, I actually had a couple questions just for those that might not have worked with the Magellan Scholarship before, but this is a question I always get from students every time, and that is the GPA. Because when they look at their GPA, they see like several different numbers, and since we have a lot of transfer students, they're always like, oh my God, is the class that I took like back in 10 years ago that I got an F in and brings up my GPA, is that going to impact me? So is it lifetime? Is it institutional? Is it what the Upstate showed? Like, which number do they have to focus on?
So that's a great question, and we get that a lot. And I'm always willing to review transcripts to be able to talk to a student's specific situation, since that does happen. So the language is institutional GPA. So that should eliminate any transfer credits. Now, if a student went to maybe participated in classes 10 years ago at Upstate, left for a while, and then comes back, unfortunately, that's going to be all in one. So those are the situations where I would talk with the student and let's look specifically at your situation. We're not going to consider the grades from 10 years ago. We're going to look at what's happening right now when you've reinvested in yourself and your education at this point, if that helps.
So if the faculty or the student reaches out so that there could be a little bit more of a attention that they're not going to be immediately disqualified based on that number, there's going to be some attention given to the circumstances.
Yes.
The other thing that I kind of had was that I wanted to kind of mention, or maybe I guess kind of make a suggestion on, is that on some of on your website where it has the kind of the different, I think like at the top of every one of the funding, there's like the basics, and some of there's like a bulleted list. Some of them have very clear language that says all campuses are eligible, and then others do not, although they are. I think maybe the mini grant doesn't have that language. One of them's missing that language, and I think that I think it would be helpful for us if that language was added to every one of those programs that were eligible for all the campuses.
I appreciate that. It's always good to have another set of eyes look at those.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I will make sure those updates happen. I appreciate it.
And I guess just if you have time for one or two quick questions here, is that since we have the faculty here, what do you think is the biggest sort of like misstep when it comes to the mentors form for the Magellan Scholar?
I think there are probably two things. I think one is being too brief in terms of very generic. What I mentioned, I'm going to help the student any way I possibly can.
Right.
That's not helpful for the reviewers. They know you are. We know that. And then not being specific to the student. So it can vary. You can have general mentoring role, and this is how I mentor all of my students, but it's also helpful for the reviewers to see that you are identifying the strengths and weaknesses of that particular applicant. So even if it's a sentence or two that says, this student has been working with me for a full semester already, knows how to do all the tasks. So we are at this point of the mentoring process, or this student is just starting out. So in addition to the standard, we're going to be looking very specifically at this. Yeah. So way too brief, and at least having a little bit specific to the student who's applying.
That's great advice. That's good. Thank you. Yeah, is there any other questions for Julie or for us? All right, well, thank you, Julie, and thank you for everyone for attending. And hopefully everyone was able to learn or get something from this.
Well, my pleasure, and please do feel